One of my favorite New Testament scholars, Rick and I are adjusting ourselves here. My favorite New Testament scholars named Kenneth Bailey. And part of why I really like him, he was a professor at the American University of Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War. And he spends a lot of time in a lot of areas of scholarship. A lot of New Testament professors don't. He mastered Arabic. There are a lot of Arabic commentaries on Scripture before the rise of Islam. And he also worked in this college, this university, teaching students during the Lebanese Civil War. And I wasn't able, despite all of the new AI and searches and everything, I've got the memory in my mind. Because I remember him talking about the fact that he was sort of expanding what the first century was like in Judea and Galilee under the Romans. And of course, his students were living in the midst of a very bloody, fierce culture war in Beirut. And his students were astonished that Jesus was able to maintain his public ministry for 3 years. Because in many places in the world, you get disappeared. The government takes you. Your enemies take you out. Once you have any visibility at all, you just get quietly assassinated and you're gone from the scene. If you take a look carefully in the Gospel of John, you'll find this is exactly what is tried on at least a couple of occasions that is recorded in the Gospel of John. It's also interesting that these are definitely tied to Jesus' claims about his relationship with the God of Israel. John 8. Very truly I tell you, again, that accentuator that we've been seeing through the Gospel of John. Before Abraham was born, I am. It's basically proclaiming Jesus right there with Moses and the burning bush. Jesus right there on Sinai. Jesus as the God of Israel. After this, they picked up stones to stone him. But Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. John 10. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. Again, his Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him. They heard what he said. They understood what he said. The sentence for blasphemy is stoning, with or without a trial. They're ready to do it. Jesus slips away. A little later in the chapter. But if I do them, meaning these miraculous works, these signs, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. Jesus keeps saying that. They understand full well what he means. And they tried to seize him, but he escaped their grasp. And as we've been seeing, as we've been moving through these passion narratives, Jesus is very much in control of what is happening. Jesus has told his disciples what is going to happen, and Jesus is orchestrating this situation even though his adversaries think they are running the show. A little bit later, Jesus will be taken to Pilate, and that's what we're going to cover this morning. And Pilate basically tries to pawn it off and says, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. And they retort, but we have no right to execute anyone. This has become a recurring conversation in New Testament commentaries. What did and didn't the Sanhedrin have the right to do? At this point, it seems quite clear they did not have the right to officially pronounce a death sentence on someone. They were under the Roman governor, and the Roman government basically said, Maybe in limited cases, if someone immediately violates or tries to desecrate the temple, you can kill them, possibly adultery. What's clear is that all of these attempts to kill Jesus were extrajudicial. In other words, they were the kind of thing you see in what in Argentina was called the dirty war. When I was in college, I toured Latin America during some real turbulent times when people would be disappeared by death squads or the government, but the government would always act like we have no knowledge of the person. In fact, if you look at the formation of American law, so many of our laws were set up, in fact, to avoid this kind of thing. If you get arrested by the police, what? You get a phone call, and you have to appear publicly before a judge within a short period of time for them to be able to hold you. All of this is to prevent the government doing extrajudicial killing. The government is supposed to make their case in public, and this is for the protection of everyone. And quite clearly, Jesus will not allow himself to be murdered. But why go through what they're about to go through? So Jesus' statements were clearly taken as blasphemous. Last week we saw Annas wanted him dead, tried to get incriminating evidence. Jesus' popularity and talk of a kingdom would cause the Romans concern. The Romans are looking at, is anyone actually going to rival Caesar or his chain of command all the way down to here? It was important politically for the religious authorities to enforce the message that Jesus be seen as illegitimate, demonic, and cursed by God. And a Roman crucifixion would do that. Much better than killing Jesus in some back alley, they wanted to make a political statement because Jesus was so popular and so well known, it needed to be for everyone to see. So now they had to deal with the Romans. Now, the Roman governor at this point, the most famous Roman governor of the time, not because he did a whole lot else that was important, but because of what he did with Jesus. And he was well known. He's written about in Josephus quite thoroughly. Pilate's tenure was marked by repeated clashes with the Jewish population. He brought military insignia bearing the emperor's image into Jerusalem and displayed ornamental shields bearing his own and the emperor's names, both violation of Jewish religious law. He also financed an aqueduct using money confiscated from the temple treasury. When Jews protested at his tribunal, Pilate stationed soldiers in plain clothes among them and ordered them to attack the protesters with clubs, resulting in many deaths. This is the kind of guy we are talking about. In fact, years later, he would be removed by the Romans for being too brutal. He's that bad. You'll see later in the book of Acts, Paul appeals to the Romans in Jerusalem and they save his life. So you have to sort of understand how these different powers are working. Ancient sources portray Pilate as inflexible, corrupt, and cruel. Now, he has a relationship with the group that are on top of the Jewish people. Now, every client state has a problem. We saw this during the American-Iraq War. You can bring your army and shoot all their soldiers, but how are you going to govern them? In order to govern a subjected people, you need intermediaries that know all the natural relationships below, but are on your side. And so they leverage their relationships in order to do the bidding of the empire. This is why tax collectors were hated because they needed to know where the money was, and the Romans aren't going to know. You need insiders. And so what happens in any client state is that insiders are elevated And if you're going to get people to betray their own family and friends and countrymen, how do you do it? With money and privilege and security. It works the same everywhere, all over the world. Last week we had an introduction to Annas and his whole family, of which Caiaphas is his son-in-law. And so this is the relationship. So Pilate and Annas, they have to get along, and the only way they really get along well is if it works for both sides. They both get what they want, which usually means money and privilege and maintaining the system so it works for them. Annas is enormously wealthy. How? Romans, if you're going to let me fleece the people, I need my cut. And so all of those all the money changers that Jesus overthrew, all that money was going to Annas and his underlings. So he's got to work with Pilate. Neither Pilate nor the Jewish priests of the house of Annas were admirable figures according to non-Christian traditions. Pilate's tenure was marked by outbursts of Jewish nationalism, and he would have been sensitive to anyone hailed as the king of the Jews. Judea was alive with guerrilla bands, and any figure might attempt to make himself king or threaten the stability of the community. So this is why they're in it together. And Jesus poses a problem because they're used to guys organizing a group of men, arming them with clubs and swords, and attacking Roman soldiers. Jesus has been a threat because he's popular, but he's not killed anyone. So the usual charge is, what are you going to do with them? When the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor, by now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they did not enter the palace. Now there's a real juxtaposition here. This corrupt leadership is sort of holier than thou, and they have to maintain the religious show. So it's like, we can't go into the Romans' palace because that just wouldn't be right. And Pilate, this is annoying for him, but he's going to have to deal with it. And so they've all got things they don't like about the relationship. But of course, Jesus gets hauled in, and this means that poor Pilate has to keep running in and out. So he's already annoyed, and he's probably already annoyed with these people, and you're going to feel the tensions and the relationships as we go through the words. So Pilate's running in and out because they won't go in. They won't go in because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. And actually, a Jewish friend of mine sent me a very interesting video recently of a Jewish scholar who's doing deep work on the Pharisees. The Pharisees were so anxious about ceremonial cleanliness that they were, it's interesting. I didn't know this back when I preached on Jesus and Peter. Jesus just washes their feet, but the Pharisees washed themselves from head to toe because all of this anxiety about ceremonial cleanliness. And if you read Jesus' commentary on them sometime, you can begin to understand. So they're not going in the building. Pilate's having to run back and forth, and he's the governor, so he's annoyed. So Pilate came out to them and asked, it'd sort of be like if there's this religious group at the Capitol, and they're not going to go into the Capitol building, but somehow they have enough power and clout that Gavin Newsom has to come out. Cynthia smiled. I saw that smile because we know exactly what that would mean. I'm the governor. Everyone comes to me. So now Gavin Newsom, it's like, Governor, you're going to have to come out of your office and you're going to have to go down in front and talk to these people. You just imagine Gavin Newsom, I got to run for president. I'm making these videos. I've got a podcast now. I'm running the biggest state in the country, and I got to go out and talk to these people. What charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. Does that sound a little passive-aggressive to you? Oh, why am I out here? If it wasn't important, we wouldn't have brought it. Oh, a whole lot of eye rolling. Pilate says, take him yourself and judge him by your own laws. I don't want to be bothered with you or with this. But we have no right to execute anyone. Oh, that's true. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Is that your own idea, Jesus asked? Or did others talk to you about me? And at this point, Pilate is probably thinking, I can't catch a break. Because the one thing he's probably imagining is that this person's going to come in and I haven't done anything wrong. Please don't kill me. Jesus doesn't do any of that. In fact, very quickly, as we see here, Jesus is going to try Pilate. Because now he's standing before Pilate, and Pilate's like, okay, what's with the king of the Jews charge? Did you hear this from others? Or Pilate doesn't know what he's going to do. Am I a Jew? So back with the passive aggression, the sarcasm. Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and your chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you've done? Jesus said, my kingdom is not from this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. Now we've seen all throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus is from the Father. Jesus is from the Father. He's also from Nazareth. But he's from the Father. And so, again, as we've seen throughout the Gospel of John, there's always these two-sided answers that Jesus gives. But now Pilate, what does he make of this? At this point, Pilate is probably just completely frustrated that I have to deal with this. He doesn't like his job. And Jesus comes in, he expects a thing, and now, what is he talking about? What am I supposed to do with this man? You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone who's on the side of truth listens to me. What's Pilate supposed to do with this? What is truth? One of the most famous things that Pilate said. And everyone would have loved to have had a tape recorder there to at least heard the intonations, because it's tremendously ambiguous. It could be cynicism. It could be sincere. We don't know. We can't tell because we don't know the intonations. But in many ways, and this has been, again, endless, if you pull off Bible commentaries, everybody debating, what did Pilate mean? In what sense? What's this? But what's interesting is that what's clear here is not what Pilate thought, but what's clear here is what Jesus meant. Throughout the Gospel of John, this question of truth is a repeated theme. It's in chapter 1, twice in chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 7, 4 times in chapter 8, twice in chapter 14, chapter 15, twice in chapter 16, twice in chapter 17, 18, and 21. The Gospel of John has been about truth, 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 the whole time. Now, what do we mean by truth? Throughout the Gospel, Jesus stands at the center of a discussion regarding truth and is the major instructor in terms of dealing with truth. Throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus clearly sees himself as giving truth. The notion of truth forms a crucial part of the substance of many of the major teaching episodes of the gospel. and binds the entire narrative within a conceptual framework that has something to do with presenting and explicating the truth. In fact, many of the things Jesus says about himself, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. All of these things are about the truth. Again and again, Jesus is like, I am the conduit of truth to the world. Therefore, throughout, although the basis of truth is God, the only true God, the relational interface of truth with individual humans occurs in their response to Jesus as incarnation of God. What does that mean here with Pilate? Basically, the argument is Pilate has never been confronted with the truth until now, and the question is, how will he respond to it? The gospel emphasizes the way that people respond to Jesus is the way they respond to God and his truth. If you remember the last couple of weeks, we talked about Julius Caesar, son of the gods. How do you know his gods? Look at Julius Caesar. Alexander the Great, another son of God. How do you understand his gods? Look at Alexander the Great. How do you understand the God of Israel? Look at Jesus. And those times before when Jesus said, I and the Father are one. Before Abraham was, I am. Jesus is basically saying, do you want to know the truth of your God? Look at me. I am confronting you with the truth about the creator of the universe. And how do we respond to this? Picking up stones. Now Pilate, sort of confused, doesn't know what to do. If people are obedient and truly do the truth by following Jesus, then they are demonstrating acceptance and obedience to God. Pilate can't see truth standing in front of him. Pilate declares that in his judgment, there's no basis for execution, which is super interesting because if Pilate were a good Roman, and we meet good Romans, it's one of the things that you find in the book of Acts. You meet a lot of good Romans. If Pilate were a good Roman, what should he have done? You go out, back out, you sigh, all right, I got to go out here and talk to these people again. You go out and you say, he's innocent, you can't execute him. If Pilate were fulfilling Roman law, that would have been the end of the case. And again, you can see that in the book of Acts when Paul is on trial. Pilate is on trial here. Roman law is on trial here. The Roman legal system is on trial here, just as the Judean legal system has been on trial all along with Jesus. And the amazing thing about Jesus is he's so difficult to charge, and I like to connect it to what Paul says about the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. There is no law against doing what Jesus has been doing. There can't be. So, Pilate, what are you going to do? Are you going to fulfill even Roman law? Are you going to stand against the mob? Are you going to do what's right, even in your own eyes? No. But is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover? Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? They shouted, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Who was he? He had taken place in an uprising. So you've got Annas and Pilate wanting to keep a lid on the things, and now you've got a crowd, and what do they say? What do we trust in? What do we trust in? We trust in revolution. We trust in swords. We trust in violence. We trust in the violent overthrow of whatever is standing against us. And in this moment, the whole world is revealed. Annas and his minions are corrupting the temple. Pilate is corrupting Roman law. The mob, what do they want? Blood. Against Jesus, there is no law, but everyone is corrupt. The way of the world is violence, and violence is what they choose. Caesar and Alexander wield death to become divine. Jesus gives life. Underlings and enemies lose their lives to elevate them to the status of God. This is the way of the world. When Jesus revealed that he will die, Peter says, never. Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Peter says he'll die for Jesus, but he wields the sword to take somebody else's life to die for Jesus. Judas sells Jesus' life for money. This is how we are. This is how we are naturally. This is our nature. Barabbas is chosen to be free because Barabbas speaks the truth we want to believe. Jesus will be sent to his death even when his judge says he's innocent because we love darkness and the light must be put out. And we don't want the light because of our darkness. Because both the heirs of God's special revelation and wielders of general revelation, Roman power, stand together to declare that the Creator God is no longer welcome in his vineyard. We wish to kill the Son and for the vineyard to be ours. Jesus tells that story in the Gospel of Matthew. But Jesus won't be disappeared. He will be put on a cross for everyone to see. And in that moment of darkness, light shines out into the world, and we see ourselves as we are. And we hate it. Jesus will, in his trial, expose the truth about our trials and our justice. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And he shows that by his death. Jesus will expose who we all are, what we love, what we trust in, what we're willing to do to maintain our miserable system we feel trapped by, but can't get out of. All the ironies. Look at the I am statements. I am is about truth. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. I am the living bread. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Let's pray. Lord, you make it so stark. Your light is so revealing of how we are and what we're about and what we love. Receive us, Lord, when we come to you. Wash us of our sin. Restore us and renew us. Not this fallen, broken nature that we manifest every day, but instead what you created us to be. The true nature given before we rejected it. Help us, Lord, to receive your Spirit and to be remade by you. Hear our prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen.